Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Turndog Talks 2. I'm delighted to be joined by Fraser Doherty, who is the man behind SuperJam, a company that is taking the jam industry by storm, or I suppose for American viewers it might be considered jelly fuel. I'm not too sure where the difference lies between those two things. I'm hoping Fraser might know. So, Fraser, first of all, thanks for joining us.
You're welcome. Thanks for inviting me.
And to get things rolling, this interview is in aid of the Successful Mistake, the book that I'm working on. So we're going to talk to Fraser about mistakes he's made and how he overcame them and turned them into success. But before we do that, Fraser, please tell us a little bit about who you are and what it is that you do.
Sure. Well, I started my own business when I was 14 years old, after my grandmother taught me how to make jam one afternoon in her kitchen in Glasgow, and I had no idea that afternoon spent making jam would go on to become my career, but I soon started making jam in my parents' kitchen and selling it at farmers markets and to little shops, and it just kind of grew and grew and got to the point I was making about 1,000 jars of jam a week in my parents' kitchen. I later came up with an idea to make jam 100% from fruit without adding any sugar or anything artificial, and about 6 years ago, I managed to get my products into most of the big supermarkets in the UK. So we've since sold millions of jars of SuperJam through a couple thousand supermarkets in about 8 countries around the world.
And how old are you now?
I'm 24, so I've been making jam for about 10 years.
My word. I mean, I think in terms of someone who started their company at that age, you are certainly the youngest part of the book. 14 is a ridiculous age to set up your business. That is such an amazing journey. And I can imagine it's so hard to get into, because getting into a supermarket like in England, Tesco and Sainsbury's, and in other countries, everyone has those big, massive supermarkets, and competition is tough. It must have been such an amazing thing to like get in those places and stay and sell and flourish.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I got my big break when I was about 16 years old, and Waitrose, who are kind of one of the big supermarkets in the UK, they held a Meet the Buyer Day, which is kind of like the X Factor of selling groceries to supermarkets. And, hundreds of people show up and stand in a queue and kind of pitch their ideas. And I went along wearing my dad's suit. It was probably 2 sizes too big for me, and kind of pitched my ideas to the buyer. And he said no at first, but gave me some advice. And after that, I moved production into a factory and created a brand, and eventually saw my products on their shelves. And, the day that I was able to go into my local supermarket and see SuperJam on the shelves was just, the most amazing moment. That was something that I'd kind of worked towards for years and years. And, that was when it finally felt real.
Man, it must have been an amazing moment. And so recently as well, you've your voice has appeared on TV for I believe Moo.com business cards. So
Right.
that must have been a cool experience for you as well.
Yeah, that's been great, and yeah, it all helps to get the story out there, I guess.
It is. It all helps. So let's kick things into gear, and I want you to think back to one of the mistakes you've made over the years. Tell us a tale about it. What happened? Where did it come from? What occurred?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I guess kind of general mistake that I made when I was first starting out, and I was kind of naive. I was just a teenager, and I didn't really know how things worked. Big mistake I made was that I thought that things could happen very quickly, and I didn't realize that almost everything takes a lot longer than you first imagine. And probably the biggest thing that took a long time was getting the packaging right. And when I first started out, I thought that packaging should make people laugh, and if you could make them laugh enough, then maybe they would buy your product. And I came up with this idea that SuperJam should be like a comic book, like SuperJam, Superman, that kind of thing. And kind of created this comic book idea, and wrote all these jokes on the labels, and even spoke about making a kind of superhero costume for me, the Jam Boy, to wear at the launch of the whole thing. And after about a year of designing that and putting money into it, I pitched that idea to the supermarkets, and they just explained that it wasn't going to work. The packaging wasn't there to make people laugh. It was there to try and get a message across. And I learned that any kind of brand has to come up with a message that you're trying to communicate with. And, too many people try and say, here are 10 reasons why you should buy my product, when really the person in the supermarket only has time to maybe listen to one message. So if you can figure out what your one message is, put all your energy into try and get that across, then maybe people will buy your products. And in the case of SuperJam, that message was 100% fruit, and we created packaging after the first attempt that hopefully gets that message across.
Wow. And I can imagine there's certain businesses and products that are just very much along those lines. If you want to appear in large chains, you want to appear in, the big supermarkets, competition is tough. You'll be on a shelf maybe with 7 or 8 or, 20 other different types of jams. And, me being a consumer will look at it and go, wow, look at all that jam. Which one should I get? And it's that instant message. So you need to think very carefully about not only the branding that will work for sort of you as a company, but what's going to have that X factor immediately.
Yeah, exactly. And I realized that no matter how good the jam in the jar was, if the label didn't look great, nobody would take it off the shelf in the first place to find out.
So what was the lessons that you sort of picked up from that then moving forward? Because I'm guessing that you then went to other buyers, other supermarkets. Did you immediately think, right, back to basics, let's get the label redone? Or did you try and rethink what you'd worked a year on? Like, what was the process?
Sure, yeah, well, basically threw everything in the bin and started all over again. And I realized that we were going to have to figure out what the message was. And at that time, I had all kinds of different reasons why I thought somebody should buy my jam. Where the fruit comes from, where we make the jam, how we make it, my story. But really, the most important message was that it was 100% fruit. And so I realized that that was the message that we were going to have to put all of our energy into trying to get across. And something that I was amazed by at that time was just how willing other entrepreneurs were to share what they'd learned with me. So when I was having a hard time with the packaging, I got in touch with lots of brands that I thought were really well designed and that were a big success, and I asked them for advice. So I got advice from the guys who started Innocent and Method, which is a cleaning products company, and Dorset Cereals, and those were all brands that I thought had great packaging. And so I guess I would say to anybody, a good thing is to figure out what your message is, and then to look for brands that you think do a good job of getting a message across, and try and figure out how they do that.
Was it just you at this point? Did everything rely on you, or was there a few other people involved in the business?
Sure. Well, at that point, it was just me, and but I was working with some designers at a design agency, so I also learned a lot about working with designers. And something that I've found a lot of the time when people are starting up, especially a food business, maybe a recipe that they've come up with themselves, and they're working with designers to create packaging, it feels like it's their baby, and it's hard for them to give over control to a designer to come up with what their baby should look like. And often people even try and design packaging themselves, and they maybe ask me or someone else for advice. And often it's hard to tell somebody that their baby's ugly. People struggle to hand over control to a designer, but the thing that you have to do is find a designer whose work you really admire, somebody who you can really trust, and and then once you hire them, there's no point in hiring them if you're not going to completely trust them to take your brand in the right direction.
Absolutely, and you point on it there. People quite often are quite stubborn. They've got this idea it's their baby, they think it's really good, and then if a big supermarket, like in your case, says no, the packaging is not going to work, a lot of people would be just like, well, the hell with them, like, this is right, we'll just go somewhere else where they'll appreciate it. So it was very mature of you to look at it and go, right, well, we need to take this advice on board and move on. Was there a part of you which thought, no, I like this sort of superhero angle, let's try it one more time, maybe approach someone else? What?
Yeah, I mean, the day that Waitrose said no, that was the lowest moment of my whole journey. That was a moment where everything that I'd worked on, everything I'd put, all my money and all my love into was wrong, and I was going to have to start all over again. And that was actually a moment where family and friends and a lot of people around me even suggested that I give up. But I guess I learned that, it sounds cheesy, but I learned that the person that you have to listen to is the customer. And, the Waitrose told me what I needed to do to make it work. And, I could have ignored them. I could have listened to my family and friends and quit. I could have maybe gone to someone else and tried and sold them the idea that I was in love with. But actually, the person who knows best is the customer. And, if you're lucky enough to get your product in front of somebody like a supermarket buyer, then, make sure you ask for their advice. But most of all, make sure that you listen to it when they give it to you.
Wow. So what was the time frame then from when you had to kind of restart? Was it another year before you got that second chance with them, or had you learnt so much that it only took a few months?
Yeah, it took best part of a year to get the packaging right, and then to set production up in a factory, So I found a 120-year-old family jam company that were willing to work with me to make my recipes on a big scale. I wasn't in a position to build my own jam factory. And so then we went into production, went onto the shelves, and I had no idea what was going to happen. But I think on the first day in one store in Edinburgh, where I come from, they sold more than 1,500 jars of SuperJam. It was, more jam than they'd ever sold in a month. They'd never seen anything like it. And, people were queuing up in the supermarket to buy the jam. And, people working behind the checkout, if somebody went through the checkout who hadn't bought a jar of jam, the person at the checkout would ask them why. And so then it was incredible. And we then launched in a couple thousand more stores. The National Museum of Scotland even put SuperJam into an exhibition of iconic Scottish brands alongside Iron Brew and Baxter's and Tunnock's Tea Cakes. It's been an amazing adventure, and I think it was all down to kind of, first of all, getting the product right, but then getting the brand right, and being able to convince big retailers to believe in it too.
But it all hinged on this one crossroads where it would have been so easy, for you to go, well, I gave it a go. They didn't like it, let's stop. But you took on the advice, and within a couple of years you went from, practically at the beginning to, well, in museums. And that's something I'm sure not many jam companies have had. So that's an amazing experience.
Thank you.
Well, before we finish up this interview, I'm interested to know if you could offer one piece of advice to a young/new entrepreneur, someone just looking to start out their first business. What bit of sage wisdom would you pass on to them?
Well, I wouldn't want to pretend to be any kind of expert, but I guess some things that I've learned. First of all, I would say just start small. A lot of people imagine that they have to quit their job or quit school or borrow money and jump in at the deep end. But actually, you can start something on a tiny scale. Sell your products at farmers markets. Just do it at the weekends or in the evenings. And if it works, you can scale it up. I would also say try and find a mentor, somebody who's been there and done it before, who can give you advice and share what they've learned. But above all, I'd just say don't be afraid. I meet so many people who have an idea for a business, but who are afraid of taking the first steps and giving it a shot. And I think that's a real shame. So I guess best of luck.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much for taking the time out of your busy day and doing this interview with me. I'm sure the people watching will have taken a lot from it, and it's an amazing journey which is about 10 years in the making, and I'm sure we've got many more years to look forward. So thank you very much, Fraser, for joining us.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
No worries. And indeed, you viewer, for watching, thank you. I hope you've picked up some great things. All the links to Fraser's empire is below, so please go and check it out. And cheers.